Hi, everyone. It is Wednesday, so you know this is Trap Chat Live. I'm your host, Kirsten Greggs, and we're bringing you Wednesday wisdom in our Is DEI Dead series. So, if you recognize this guy, it's because you've seen him on television, perhaps. I don't know. He's an MSNBC legal analyst, the host of the Charles Coleman podcast. Let's see what else you do. Two-time Howard graduate, attorney, member of Omega Psi Phi Fraternity Incorporated. Apparently, the best dressed analyst on cable news, the scion of Suit Watch, and the curator of Black Brilliance. I am so pleased to be joined today by DICE champion, diversity consultant, and inclusion strategist, Charles Coleman Jr. Please introduce yourself in a way that you want to.
Good afternoon, Kirsten. So glad to join you for Trap Chat. Truly a fan and glad to be here. Looking forward to today's conversation. I am a lawyer by trade, but at the end of the day, do a number of different things. I am a diversity and inclusion strategist, a DICE champion. We'll get into what some of that means, as well as a civil rights attorney who functions as a legal analyst on MSNBC. So I wear a number of different hats, and I don't always get to explore conversations around D&I in the public sphere the way that I'm looking forward to in today's conversation. So thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you. So let's just jump right in. And I'm going to ask you the question that I asked my other guests. Is DEI dead?
DEI is in hospice. It's not dead, but it is in hospice. It is in a very, very critical space and on life support. And I do think that there's a space and an opportunity for things to reverse themselves, but only so much. I think that part of why we are where we are is because we didn't understand the world of DEI before we made the commitment to invest in DEI. So there was this time period where, for example, there were a number of people in the space, practitioners like myself, who were pushing the importance of DEI in the corporate world. We were pushing the need for it, and there was a significant amount of resistance during that time period. And then there was immediately after that a disruption, which was pretty much brought about by a lot of the racial unrest that occurred in America around social justice and different things in society that were happening. Many of us know them from the news. Well, what that did was it immediately made the people who weren't listening before run back to the first group of folks and say, hey, what's that D&I stuff you were talking to me about? Like, hey, we're going to do all of that. Like, yeah. And it was partially because they hadn't been listening, so they didn't take the time to actually understand it, that they threw money at the problem. And now we're on the backside of that. And in this third phase of like the modern era or the contemporary era of D&I, there is a sort of reckoning and a settling where those folks who were actually funding and investing and had run back to the D&I practitioners and said, hey, we want to do all the things you said, are realizing that maybe what they're getting for their investment or what they expected from their investment is not what they should have. And that is what's causing the pullback and the contraction, and people sort of feeling like it may not have the value that it does. And so once people in corporate spaces in particular start to realize that something doesn't have the value that they believe that it should, and or that they can get away with not spending the money on it, you start to see a decline, which is why I say it's in hospice as opposed to, fully dead. We're not there yet. There's a possibility of some sort of, revival, if you will, of D&I as an industry, but it will require us reimagining how we approach this conversation and understanding what it is and is not supposed to do.
Yeah, I'm glad you mentioned that, because in 2020, we were all sitting at home and we did see a surge in organizations making public commitments to DEI initiatives, We saw organizations like the NFL, for example, being sued for discrimination as a result of some of their so-called commitments. How can organizations hold themselves accountable for their DEI goals and initiatives?
That's a great question. I think that for me, I always start when I'm talking to any sort of potential client in that space is I always start with asking them, what's your strategic diversity plan? Do you have a strategic diversity plan? And creating a strategic diversity plan for your organization is step one for you setting up a framework for accountability, because everybody who has a role in that process now clearly defines what it is that they're supposed to do and what their measures of success are, whether you are internal DEI as a stakeholder, whether you are leadership of an organization as a stakeholder, whether you are a consultant that's being hired and supporting in that realm as a stakeholder. Your strategic diversity plan is what is going to be the outline for your progress and your journey as an organization. And so without one, it's nearly impossible to make a determination as to how successful you're being. The depth of that plan is really an investment into getting into the roots of whatever your issues are or whatever opportunities exist within your organization for improving your diversity and the culture of your organization. So what do I mean when I say depth? One of the things that I offer and other practitioners do as well are cultural audits, because there is a difference between understanding the number of Black employees that you have of color, or the number of neurodivergent, the amount of neuro support you offer for neurodivergent employees, or whatever programs you have that are intended to support different types of employees within your organization, and also still understanding how that coalesces within the culture of your organization. But that's a deep dive. Right. And that deep dive and that investment is what you do when you are serious about getting to the root, and not just saying we want to increase the amount of diversity in our management team by 30%, which is a benchmark that by itself doesn't do very much, but within the context of a larger plan that has been well thought out, well researched, and is based on data, you have an opportunity to have a much different impact. So in terms of measuring success, every organization has to go back to the question of, number one, do we have a strategic diversity plan? Number two, are the stakeholders who are responsible for executing and supporting this plan aware of their roles, and how are they performing around their roles within this process? And then number three, what's our plan B? What's our contingency plan if we don't hit our targets? Are we feeling like we're really, really close and we just kind of push forward and just give it a little bit more effort? Or are we feeling like we're just completely missing the mark and need to go back to the drawing board? But everything starts and ends with that strategic diversity plan. That is the best measure of success. And it's an imperative that it is something that is in the minds of organizational leaders, but it's also, if you're serious about this, something that should be readily available to and accessible by your everyday employees. They should know where it is. They should know it's a thing. They should know that that is the North Star for your organization's diversity, and be very familiar with it.
Yeah, and I mentioned the NFL because of the story that came out, I think at the beginning of this week or end of last week.
Yeah.
Jim Trotter, another diversity case. We saw earlier in the year, Brian Flores. So that's an indication that whether the NFL has said we're doing all of these things and this is our plan, and they're telling the public these things, that they're committed to diversity, that we're seeing that perhaps they're not. So in instances where discrimination cases aren't getting that national attention, how can employees, prospective employees, consumers, how can they assess the authenticity and effectiveness of these commitments, both within the organization and the communities where they do business?
Well, I think a lot of that is about paying attention. And what I mean by that is, of course, if you're an employee, you should know, as I was just talking about, what is the plan for diversity around your organization's growth, development, and progression. That's number one. But then number two, if you're an employee, you know what that organization feels like on a daily basis. You know what it is to be there. You know the culture of that organization. And the thing that you have to be honest about from an awareness standpoint is, are those two things aligning? And that's why I talk about culture in being a DICE champion as a central part of me being a practitioner. I think that people don't understand, yes, policy is great. And I think that that's where things begin. But I have, as I imagine you have in your capacity as a recruiter and all the different people you've placed in different positions, seen a number of different workspaces where, for example, people have amazing policies. And on paper, this looks like the ideal workplace. But then you talk to people who actually do work there and are in that environment, and they tell you it sucks. And that integrity gap that really does sort of prompt that is really predicated on the notion of culture. And so I think that people have to sort of be emotionally intelligent in terms of understanding, like, well, they said they were doing this, but now I'm seeing this, which is why for your NFL example, there's clearly a disconnect somewhere within that organization around what they're saying they're about and what they're demonstrating they're about. And I would argue that that more likely than not is connected to the notion of culture. The
Okay.
culture is set by leadership and it's maintained through accountability. And so,
Mm,
whether you are an employee or whether you are a consumer who's really thinking critically about how you want to invest your money or where you want to spend your money or what you want to support, you should be paying attention to the culture of an organization to make sure that whatever it is that they say on their website, whatever their statements are about diversity, is that actually reflected in what it is that you hear about this organization in the public?
mm,
Because regardless of whatever's on the NFL's website, their statements line up, but certainly what's coming out in the wash from other people does not seem to support that entirely. And I think that that's a function of a culture gap that needs to be addressed.
all right, let's stay there for a bit, but shift just a little to the side because you did spend over a decade as a senior trial attorney at the US EEOC,
Mhm.
and you would be someone, perhaps, if that was in your district, that would have been looking at one of these diversity cases.
Yeah.
So, how did your work at EEOC prepare you to transition into your work as a diversity consultant and an inclusion strategist?
So that really helped me merge my identity and
Okay.
create a space that allowed for my identity to augment my experience. And what I mean by that is the EEOC enforces the law. It enforces Title VII of the 1964 Civil Rights Act, as well as a number of different statutes. The EEOC and the laws that the EEOC enforces is just the bare minimum. That is the bottom floor
Oh,
of what is legal for you to do and not to do in a workspace. Understanding that was a starting point, not the final point. And the reason I say that it involved or allowed me to allow my identity to support the work that I was doing was because I knew as a Black person in corporate spaces who had been in corporate spaces that just doing the minimum for any business wasn't going to create an environment where people who did not feel appreciated, did not feel seen, did not feel welcome, but still were within the lines of legality,
mm,
were going to be able to perform their best. So I began to understand there's a huge gap between having a good workplace and violating EEOC law. And you don't automatically get that in one step. And that's the gap that my practice and my work in D&I has really tried to mend, because people know how not to do, the minimum in terms of, or to go beyond the minimum that's going to keep them out of court, that's going to keep them out of, violating the law. But then what do you do to go from there to actually creating a model workplace or anything close to a model workplace that's going to attract and help you retain top and diverse talent? That's the gap that my practice closes, because I understand that, yes, it's important to know the foundation, which is the law and Title VII and the ADA and the ADAA and all of those statutes, but that's just the minimum. If you want to create a space that really works the way you want it to work, you've got to really invest in the notion of D&I, which is where I came into the picture.
Yeah, I never thought of it that way. There's a huge gap between what's a good workplace and what's legal,
Legal, right.
in the workplace.
Right. Like, well, you're doing the legal stuff. That's the bare minimum, right? But that's like literally and if you think about it, Kirsten, the bare minimum of anything would not qualify as good. So, you know what I mean? Like, you're doing the bare minimum. We have EEO officers. We're compliant. That means nothing about your workplace. It just means it's not illegal. It doesn't even mean it's not bad. It just means it passes muster of legality. That's it. So understanding that there's a significant difference between that and good is a very important distinction.
I'm starting to understand why my good friend Kate Bischoff always says she loves complaints. Like, she loves to get complaints. She loves EEO complaints. Like, bring them on. And there was something I saw yesterday. A few people have sent it to me because it was about a job application, and they were asking some of the questions. And again, these are voluntary questions for an organization who is trying to improve their diversity metrics, meaning their numbers. And they were asking questions like, did you receive school lunch? Did you ever receive public assistance? Things like that. And people are like, that can't be legal. Well, it is, but that doesn't mean that it's right. That doesn't mean that you want to be identified by that. It was someone I think it was Rebecca last week when we were talking about AI and the intersection of diversity, equity, inclusion, and all the other letters that will come after it. And she was mentioning how sometimes we over correct for how we're trying to eliminate bias and actually end up doing more harm than we intended. So,
yeah, I mean, that stuff like that becomes a question of cultural competency. And when you are not invested in understanding, number one, how D&I functions, and number two, investing in improving whatever it is that you're doing around D&I, you open the door for that because you make legality your ceiling rather than your floor.
Okay. So let's talk some legal stuff, because you are the legal mind here.
Right.
The June Supreme Court decision that made the ability of public and private colleges and universities to consider race as a factor in deciding which of the qualified applicants be admitted, had a lot of people wondering and lamenting that corporate DEI programs will become illegal.
I think I heard about that case.
Yeah. What if any impact will that decision that, made that illegal impact this? What, if any, impact will the decision have on influencing and shaping the approaches corporations take towards promoting and committing to diversity and inclusion efforts in the workplace?
Yeah, so I'm loath to answer that question outright, and I'll tell you why.
Okay.
I'm always concerned that, like, somebody could be listening and say, you know what, I had never thought about asphyxiating the D&I programs in that way. So I don't want to give people like ideas about like what they can legally do now. But here's what I will say. I do think that this does open the door for people who, so let's back up for a moment. Okay. We have to understand that D&I was never popular. It was never going to be popular. There was a space in which D&I had been deemed necessary or essential. There are a number of different things around our political discourse, around what it is that is going on outside of the workplace that has given cover for people who never wanted to support D&I to really push back. This decision doubles down for those folks. So where I am with that is to say, yes, I fully expect that the acceptable nature of reducing support for D&I in corporate spaces is likely going to be something that will continue.
Okay.
I think that in terms of employees and other stakeholders who are interested in fighting that off, I think you have to, number one, I call it back to the future. And what I mean by that is D&I didn't always exist. And in some respects, D&I may have made corporate workspaces a little lazy in terms of taking on for ourselves a certain level of responsibility to proactively seek out or try to create spaces that are going to support the growth and evolution of who we are in certain companies. Now, granted, I would love for everybody to say, hey, we all gonna put in $100 and fly in I don't know, Michael Eric Dyson to do our Black History Talk, for example.
You're not getting Michael Eric Dyson for no $100.
No, I'm saying all of the employees. You know, I think that but I will say this: I think that there are a lot of misconceptions in truth. And one of the misconceptions is, well, if they take D&I away from us, it's gone. Well, is it? You are going, why, you could argue that for as unpopular as D&I was, and for as unnecessary as it was seen for a lot of people, it was a luxury in a recently developed luxury in other spaces. Where am I going with this? Where I'm going with this is some of the efforts that we sort of sat back and allowed the D&I committees and the ERGs to plan and put together for our workspace. We may have to coalesce and put together ourselves in certain workspaces to make sure that they survive, depending on employers to spend that type of money or to do the types of things for us as an employee group in order to sort of like make us comfortable is not guaranteed. And some of it is going to require us being proactive, where it's like, look, we're going to build our own mentorship program. Maybe at some point we take it to the leadership of the organization, and maybe we don't have a huge budget at first. Because here's the thing, Kirsten, you can't have it both ways. I can tell you, I've been practicing in the diversity and inclusion space for well over 10 years, and there have been very, very few times that I've heard from people who are stakeholders on the D&I side internally who say they gave us a great budget. So you can't complain about not having a huge budget and then say we don't have enough money and then say there's no way that we could put together ourselves the little bit of money that they was giving us. Like you got to sort of be able to say, well, on one end or the other, if they weren't giving you a lot of money, then you don't got a lot of ground to make up, right? Like, so that's the whole thing. I think that we just can't, and by we, I'm talking about any stakeholder of any race or background or group who believed that believes that D&I is an important part of their workspace. You now have to be proactive. Maybe you were on the committee before, maybe you weren't, but if you don't want to see it go away, you can't lie on your back or sit on your heels and wait for whatever business or organization you're a part of to make that decision for you. You've got to affirm, hey, this is what we want, and we want this to keep going. And also be creative about solutions where they say, if they make it a money thing, what's the alternative? Here's what we can do. Here's what we want to manage that is at a reduced rate or a reduced budget. I think that those are the things that require. So you got to get back to the future. I mean, back to the future. Before D&I, what were we doing to make ourselves right? Well, then the notion of D&I existing can't paralyze us. We're like, oh, we don't got to do nothing because they're doing it all. That's really what it is.
I have a comment up here from Bart Bailey. Let's go team. This is a great segue into my next question. Note, DEI is not enough. Move to or add in liberating systems and justice. Thank you for that comment. So, as I said, that is a great segue because over the years, and you've just alluded to it as well, we've seen the acronyms for organizations diversity framework range from DNI, DEI, DEIB, DIB, JEDI, and those are just a few. Why did you choose the acronym DICE to represent the diversity initiatives you champion, and what does it signify in the context of your approach to diversity and inclusion?
Sure. This is a little bit of sauce for anybody who's checking it out. This is a little bit of the sauce. I'm gonna take you behind the scenes and explain why my theory of change as a practitioner differs from other people's. So DICE is an acronym which stands for Diversity, Inclusion, Culture, and Equity. It is not necessarily practiced in that order, but it made sense and was catchy, so that's how it got put together. But it's important to understand the significance of each of those sort of pillars. Diversity, a lot of people they use it, but they don't necessarily understand it. I explain it to many of my clients and potential clients as follows. If I come to your job and I'm looking for you, or I come to your job's annual picnic, that's probably the better analogy. I come to your job's annual picnic. I don't know who does what. I don't know who's in charge. I don't know who's important and who's not. I just know who's there, and everybody who's there works. What I see is diversity. That's diversity. It's just what I see without knowing or understanding what the roles are. Inclusion is who is a part of the decision making in the workplace, who is at the table and a part of the conversations in a meaningful way where their opinions are sought and valued and taken into account, where their voice matters. That's inclusion. All right. So you can have a diverse workplace that's not inclusive at all.
Okay.
Equity are the rules of the workplace, both spoken and unspoken. Is there a different sort of pay scale for the people who are women or are men? Is there a different sort of set of rules around how certain groups may take certain liberties or have certain advantages granted to them that aren't granted to others? That is equity. It's about fairness within the organization in terms of resources, how things are distributed, and the type of credit and recognition people get. All of those things are fine. But the linchpin that separates me from a number of other people is culture, because culture is the glue that brings all of those things together. It's the sauce that mixes in every other ingredient that you have in such a way that actually makes those three things work together. Because you can have a workplace that's diverse and not inclusive. You can have a workplace that's equitable and inclusive, but not diverse. All of these things, in order to work together, require an investment in culture. And that glue is what makes the total picture end up as what it is. And that's why I try to focus so much on it as a practitioner, because I understood that in silos, each of these things can continue to fail an organization from its desire to move forward. But culture is the linchpin. And that's why I focus on it the way that I do.
I had to look up linchpin because I don't know how to spell. So that's why it took me so long to get that up there. Thank you for that explanation. So we're coming to our final question in the main section. I think we're making good time here. And this is probably the thing that worries me the most, because I am in the, talent acquisition field.
Yeah.
With cuts in DEI budgets and programs, What guidance or insights do you have for corporate DEI professionals and external consultants who may be experiencing fatigue or burnout while working in the field of DEI? And are there any resources you would recommend for those interested in sharpening the tools in their box?
So I have two answers for this. The first one is generally as a stage, just to set the stage. I think as well as I do. If you don't know, the average lifespan for internal DEI people hovers around 3 years. It is a revolving door, regardless of the organization, the agency, the industry. It's a revolving door that has about a 3 year lifespan, give or take a couple of months. There are a number of reasons for that. One of the reasons is oftentimes people discover that the investment that they said they wanted to make it to D&I is not really the investment that they're actually interested in making. Only you don't find that out until you're in the position. And after you've been there for 6 months, sort of having your meeting people, your listening tours, that you really figure out, oh, this is a sham. Y'all don't really, oh, okay. So y'all brought me in thinking that I was gonna sort of like just go along with a $250,000 salary and no budget for programming or executing because
And no staff.
and reporting to HR and all of the things being wrong because it's a lot of money. Well, that happens a lot. And at this point, you shouldn't be falling for the same trick. But here's the thing. It reminds me of a conversation that you and I had some time ago around the process of recruitment. And then you sort of explained from this perspective of a job seeker, what job seekers do to prepare to enter into that market. And one of the things that I think is important is that for any practitioner who is thinking about leaping into another space, we have to be very, very honest about pressing for a deeper understanding of the commitment of the organization to what it is that you are trying to accomplish. Number one, do they have a strategic diversity plan? I will continue to go back to that. If they don't, and they are an organization that has been working with a diversity consultant or in-house diversity people for any significant amount of time, that should be a red flag because you should be asking yourself and asking them. So it was never proposed that you had a strategic diversity plan. How so? How was that never proposed? And if it was, then why? What were the barriers for getting that not for not getting that approved? That's a big one. Another thing that you should be sort of looking at as a red flag before you even enter into these spaces, because the burnout that you're describing and everything that you've talked about, at that point, Kirsten, is too late. Like we have to deal with these things as practitioners, as people who are stakeholders and push the space. We have to deal with that on the affirmative end before we even make the selection. It's just kind of like if you get into a relationship and you're like, oh man, I have a really bad boyfriend. Well, there were things you probably should have, you might have been surprised, but there are some things that you might should have used as red flags going into the relationship before the relationship was established that would have helped you, not be in a position that you're in. When you are a practitioner, whether you're a consultant or whether you're thinking about an internal position, you should be paying a lot of attention to how guarded the organization is as far as allowing you access to leadership. Like if leadership is not a part of the process beyond your vetting, but the conversations about what is to be accomplished, you need to be thinking about how high up are they letting me go in terms of who I can talk to, and how difficult is it for me to talk to these people? Why? Because I go back to the notion of culture. Culture is set by leadership and maintained through accountability. If culture or the people who are responsible for setting culture have an aversion to meeting with you or talking to you or have an aversion to you having access to them, that is a number one red flag that you are setting yourself up for a burnout situation, because you're going to be spinning your wheels and no one who's able to hold folks accountable is going to be able to, you're not going to be able to access them. But that was something that you could have figured out early on, because leadership is really a critical component of a successful D&I program in any industry and in any organization.
Okay. All right. I just want to get this last quote up before we move to our rapid fire questions.
Making good time here.
Yeah. And as usual, I can't spell.
Hey, I mean, I'm glad I don't have to spell on the podcast or on television, because I probably would lose both jobs.
Nah. They would just put the red lines under it like they do me.
Oh.
Yeah. So I can at least know when it's misspelled. All right, here we go. Culture is set. I want to stay there. Culture is set by leadership and maintained by accountability. I think that's a bar. But yes, I've been totally enjoyed this conversation. I've learned a lot, and I hope others have as well. If you got to watch live, great. If you didn't, make sure you catch a replay. But now it's time for my second favorite part, the rapid fire questions. Again, I ask every guest, what is the best piece of career advice you never took or you took later in your career?
Every job has a purpose. Every job has a purpose for you. Figure out what it is. I think that early on in my career, there were jobs that I did not see myself in, and roles that I did not see myself fulfilling. But each of those opportunities gave me exposure to something that someone who wasn't in that role didn't have. And I had to understand what that thing was, get that out of it, and then realize how to move on. So every job that you're in gives you exposure to something that somebody who's not in that job doesn't have. Figure out what the most valuable thing or things are and lean into those things. And it makes your time and your purpose much more fulfilling as part of the jobs that you didn't necessarily see yourself in to start.
It's a much more eloquent way of something I tell the people I coach, and that is, what would not have happened if I wasn't here? Or what would not have happened if you weren't here? That's a much better way to say that. So thank you. You can't use this one again. You can't use that same one. I need something new. But what advice would you give to your early career self?
Balance patience with assertiveness. I think that for Black people in particular, we are, for a number of different reasons, challenged by the notion of self-advocacy in certain spaces. And generationally, we're seeing some of that dissipate because younger generations don't have I won't call it fear, I'll call it the reservation around they will literally say, a job, F that job, I'm leaving. And for better or for worse.
Yeah.
And I think that for our generation and those before us, the value around stability and just sort of the uncertainty of whether you were going to be able to find employment, and then also how that was going to impact the rest of your life, in many cases silenced us or made us less aggressive advocates for ourselves in certain spaces. Now, the other side to that is, if you look at younger folks in the job market or in the workplace now, they might be at different times a little too aggressive in terms of trying to advocate for things that they haven't necessarily earned yet. Right. So there is a delicate balance between being patient and humble and understanding that within your work and your humility, you could be successful. but then also knowing that when that time comes, when you have earned that, there's nothing wrong with standing pat until you are given what it is that you've owned, and don't let people play in your face, as we say.
Yeah, don't let people play in your face. Oh, so that might be the answer to my next question. If you wrote a book about your career so far, what
Hmm.
would the title be?
I literally just came up with this off the top of my head. So my immediate title. All right, so I'm gonna be extra surprised with this, um, and I'm not gonna give you just a title. I'm gonna give you a title and a subtitle,
Okay.
because the title itself would be Black Brilliance.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but but the subtitle would be, because I just came up with this on top of my head, and I would like it, and I like it. If you're talking about my career so far, so it would be Black Brilliance, semicolon, how $1 million mouthpiece paved the way for from law to bridge the gap between law and media.
So your memoir will be out in the summer of 2024.
Black Brilliance, semicolon, how $1 million mouthpiece bridge the gap between law and
You
media.
just listen. I feel like that's gonna manifest. Summer 2024
There you go.
coming
That was
out,
it. That
coming
was it.
out
That
on
would be the title.
Black Brilliance Press.
Black Brilliance Press. There you go. Boom, boom, boom.
All right. What TV show, book, or movie character gives you a glimpse of yourself?
There's so many. I see a lot of myself in. So anybody who follows me knows that uh, I'm a huge Family Guy fan. There are days that I'm Peter Griffin. There are days that I'm Tony Starks. There are days that
Oh,
I am Yoda, depending on
mm-hmm.
who I'm talking to
Okay.
and what the situation is. And then there are days that that I'm not Daniel LaRusso, because he was just soft. Um, I think that and then there are days that, I'm Richard Wright in Black Boy. I
Oh,
think that, there are so many different spaces that really require you to readjust your perspective because of your position, and evaluate things and widen your perception, because that's how you are able to make more reasoned decisions. If there's one thing that I have um, developed an appreciation for as I've aged and grown in my career, is just the value of perspective, and how it's important to, before you actually respond to something, look at it from a variety of angles. That way you can feel much more comfortable when someone challenges what it is you say, because you've vetted it through different lenses.
okay.
Whereas when you're younger, you sort of have a tendency to respond just from the perspective that you're in at the moment. And then you learn that, like, that can really put you in a very tenuous space. Whereas if you develop a reputation for being thoughtful, in the sense of like considering a lot of stuff other than the way that it might initially come to you, people are more inclined to sort of trust your decision making and listen to what you have to say, because they're aware that you didn't just fly off the handle or think about things only in a way that is germane to who you are.
That's excellent advice. Excellent advice. All right. What's your go-to songs, or music genre when you want to hype yourself up?
Everything is hip hop. Period. Period. Everything is
Hip hop.
always hip hop, and actually, you know what? Actually, wow. I shame on me. Everything is hip hop unless it's specific, and I say this with all sincerity. I can get in the right frame of mind, I can get in the right mood, I can get the right sort of general, mindset through a lot of different hip hop.
Okay.
But if I have to actually like perform, if there's something I actually have to do, a big meeting, a trial, a closing argument, if I'm in trial, if I'm at a trial or I'm doing a presentation or a series of presentations where I have to be on, hip hop is going to play because I'm going to just be feeling the various highs and lows and different sort of emotions that you experience through that music.
Okay.
If there's a finite point in time, a finite sort of thing that I have to do, a closing argument, I got to perform or, make a speech or so on and so forth. There's one song and one song only. Well Done by Erica Campbell. That's it. That's it. That's it. It's going to be Well Done by Erica Campbell.
Please don't sing it because we get thrown off YouTube.
I won't. I'll let people go find that. And then,
Well Done by Erica Campbell.
And if you know Erica, and if anybody of y'all watching, y'all know Erica Campbell, and she
tell her
watches
to call
MSNBC, you tag her and you tell her, give me a shout. I appreciate her and her work.
Again, I got a pull from last week because Rebecca said that her go-to song was Stomp by Kirk Franklin. And everybody knows how I love gospel music. But
Stomp, though?
Stomp? She likes it. She likes the song. And she used to be in a Christian rock band, so that has something to do with it. But I said, you know what? I said, I got a better song for you. And I said, Shackles. I said, that's in the same thing. So I said, Shackles by Mary Mary. But again, no disrespect to Erica Campbell or to you, but like, it's not a good song.
Shackles? It's a better song than Shackles.
No, I said
Well Done is a better song than Shackles.
Maybe lyrically, like what the message says. However,
Shackles sounds like
a good time.
Shackles sounds like
the end.
The song that you play
when you're
during
in a good mood.
80s movie montage when like the street gang has been convinced to clean up the church and they're clean, and they're like painting the church, and that's what Shackles sounds like. That's what Shackles sounds like. It is not touching Well Done by a long shot.
Let's disagree to disagree. All right. So I've enjoyed myself. First, I want to point out that we both had Black Brilliant shirts when we started, but I asked you to please at least change the color because what I like to do is represent my guests when they're on the show. If you guys have seen other guests that have merchandise, I've worn their merchandise. Well, they were guests on my show, but I was surprised when you came back and you had on some trap gear. So I appreciate that. Folks who don't know, the NO stands for Next Opportunity. Some folks saw the mug I was drinking out of last week on Jack Kelly's show and asked me for that. But yes, thank you for wearing that. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
That's awesome. So Charles, before we go, tell folks what's next for you and where we can go to support you and your work.
Sure. The easiest way to follow is online on social media. It's Charles Coleman Jr. pretty much on everything. CF Coleman Jr. on Twitter, CF Coleman Jr. on IG. You can find me on any of those platforms. Charles Coleman Jr. on Facebook. I was triple verified, but then Elon did whatever Elon did. So I don't, have a verification on Twitter anymore, but you can still find me there, or on X. You can still find me there easily. Most immediately, we have season 2 of the Charles Coleman podcast, which is going to be coming soon. So make sure you're signed up there. CharlesColemanPodcast.com. It's the easiest way to find me. And that's the easiest way to sort of access like my most unfiltered, very raw opinions about what it is that's going on. You can tune into MSNBC at any time, and I hope that you do. I hope that that's something that is a staple in your home in terms of where you get the news, and you're going to see me. But I think that for people who are interested in how I think or want to see more about who I am, the podcast is a great way to do that. And social media is obviously a fantastic way for us to connect. But if you're one of those people out there, you don't want to do social media, you're not that person, I got great news for you. This Saturday, you can turn on your TV at 8 p.m. and for 2 whole hours, I will be hosting or guest hosting the Eamon Show on MSNBC. So people always ask, like, well, do you know when you're going to be on TV? And sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But I can tell you right now, as I sit here at Trap Chat, just a couple days from now, I will be on MSNBC from 8 to 10 Saturday night, holding it down for my friend Eamon as guest host for his show. So I would love for you to tune in, tweet about it, talk about it, share it with your friends. It's going to be a good time.
All right. Again, thank you so much for spending time on Trap Chat today. I know that you have a busy schedule, and I do not take for granted that you gave us some of your time to talk about DEI. Do come back next week for the final Is DEI Dead series installment. I'm going to have another excellent guest. Tara, don't want to mispronounce her name. Tara Haynes will be my guest next week, and she'll be speaking from a corporate DEI perspective. So thanks everyone for tuning in. Catch the replay, share, and we will see you next week. Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day.